Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it is Chris at Westminster.
And it's Alex in the Newscast studio.
And also Joe Pike in the Newscast studio.
And we are recording this episode of Newscast on Thursday evening, just past 7 p.m. I feel like today has been the longest day because you couldn't tear your eyes away from anything that was happening in the Labour Party because it felt like something was happening every 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Would you put it to an even smaller time interval than that, Alex?
No, I'd say that's about right. And it's also one of those days where what happened first thing this morning, which was to do with Angela Rayner, feels like it happened 17 years ago by this time tonight because so much has moved subsequently.
And actually the biggest thing in this whole drama around will Keir Starmer survive as Prime Minister? Will he be challenged? Who will challenge him? When will it happen? Who else will join in? Actually, the biggest kind of revelation for that was this evening at tea time, Chris, wasn't it? And we should just explain the various things that have happened.
Yeah, we should say, first of all, just to be absolutely clear as we record, that there isn't yet a formal leadership challenge to the Prime Minister. That has not happened yet because nobody has got to the magic number of 81 MPs to trigger a formal contest. But my goodness, the wider conversation is absolutely roaring along. And yeah, the development at tea time on Thursday was Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, not an MP, you've got to be MP to be a candidate to be the Labour Party leader, saying he's found a seat, Makerfield, not a million miles from Manchester city centre to the west of Manchester. And the MP there, Josh Simons, is going to stand down, and so there'll be a vacancy. And not only that, but Labour have made it clear that this time, unlike that by-election not a million miles away in Gorton and Denton a few months ago, this time they will let Andy Burnham stand as the Labour candidate, or at least they won't stand in his way. So we are looking at the prospect of a by-election in which Andy Burnham is the Labour candidate. In other words, he has a potential path back to Westminster. What a barnstorming circus of a by-election it's going to be. It'll be extraordinary because you've got a guy on the ticket whose pitch is, I want to be Prime Minister. He won't be running defending Labour's record in government over the last 2 years, although plenty of people will challenge him about it, given that, he'll have he's Labour on the ticket. He's going to be running to be Prime Minister. And Reform are already saying they're going to throw everything at it. They did pretty well in the area in the elections last week. What a thing that's going to be.
No, Joe, it's almost going to be like a sort of mini prime ministerial election in a system where we don't elect the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. I mean, the opportunity for Andy Burnham is enormous in that if he wins this once Labour sort of stronghold, which now looks like Reform are on the march.
Because there aren't any Labour strongholds really anymore.
Yeah, but it was sort of one of the strongest, safest seats in the country. If he can win it, he can say to everybody in the Labour Party, you think we need to take on Nigel Farage's party? Look, I'm the guy who in this seat has managed to beat him, and it wasn't some sort of easy victory at all. The alternative, of course, is that his political career stops stone dead. The Labour majority is about 5,400, but that's from a couple of years ago, of course, and a lot has changed since then.
And Alex, the last political test in that part of the world, and it's more closer to Wigan than Manchester, isn't it, Makerfield, was the local authority elections last Thursday, basically the trigger for all the drama we've seen this week with Keir Starmer, and Reform did spectacularly well in those elections in that part of England.
Yeah, they did. They absolutely did. They took seat after seat after seat off Labour in Wigan, and Makerfield sits under Wigan Borough Council, even though it's in not Wigan itself. And not only that, but if you look across that whole area, so just down the road, St Helens, Reform again, took seats, Labour lost seats. And Nigel Farage has already come out and said that they're going to throw everything at this by-election. And of course, the Green Party are very likely to stand in this by-election as well, who are nibbling away at Labour's support from the other direction. So the backdrop to it is difficult, and a majority of just under 5,400 in normal terms would be an okay majority, but this is not normal times, and this will not be a normal by-election. The only caveat would say to all of that, so it is a bit of a test for Andy Burnham as to whether he can win this seat. And as Joe says, if he wins it, he can say, I'm the guy that can beat Reform. If he doesn't win it, quite the opposite. The thing about by-elections, though, is we are absolutely right to look at the results from the local authority elections last week, and because they show that Reform's had a real growth of popularity in that area and Labour's support has fallen back. Really important context. But people do often behave differently in by-elections than they do in other elections. And I think for this by-election in particular, that notion is going to be on steroids because, as Chris said, every man and his dog's going to be there. Every party's going to be throwing everything that they can at it. This is a by-election, as we say, which is not just for an MP. Obviously, electing an MP is really important. This is for the guy that's made no secret about the fact he's standing because he wants to challenge Keir Starmer. All of those variables, plus the fact that, according to the pollsters, Andy Burnham's personal ratings are better than the Labour Party's more broadly, are all the variables to throw in the mix. But my goodness, what a test.
And Chris, because we're now a few steps away from Andy Burnham potentially being Prime Minister, everyone is genning up on what his political philosophy, where it's actually arrived at now, after he's been Mayor of Greater Manchester for nearly 10 years now. Before that, he was a Culture Secretary under Gordon Brown. Before that, he was a special advisor in the Blair government. So people are looking for clues as to, well, what kind of Prime Minister he might be now that that's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, quick caveat, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, given that there's that by-election to come, but it's a totally fair kind of question. And
yeah, let's be the only people in British political journalism this week who haven't got carried away.
Sorry to be a
not to accuse you of
party
anything
pooper,
like
but I'll but yeah, totally. I mean, we're going to start seeing scrutiny. I mean, particularly of Andy Burnham, given that, if you like, his explicit public campaign has started now in the statement that he's put out this evening, which is further ahead really than where Wes Streeting is. We'll come on to talk about Wes Streeting, but he offered a critique of the Starmer approach to government, but he didn't explicitly say that he would be running or declaring, etc., etc. So yeah, Andy Burnham his pitch is going to be that he would govern the UK in the way that he has been the mayor of Manchester. He talks about Manchesterism. He's talked about what he's done, for instance, with public transport and the buses there, the B network, the private investment that he's brought into Manchester city centre. Although some say that there's quite a lot of that was happening already before his tenure. And then there will be scrutiny of his sort of record before that. And he used to get a lot of accusations lobbed at him about flip-flopping, about not having a clear sense of who he was. He argues, and his supporters argue, he has sharpened that a lot as mayor. The other thing he's going to have to do is, and this has started already, by the way, but is get to know one heck of a lot of Labour MPs, because he's not been at Westminster for quite a while, and the Parliamentary Labour Party has changed massively in the time that he's been away. I mean, not least expanding massively a couple of years ago. So he and his supporters, and yes, he has plenty of supporters at Westminster who can help him with that in the time that it takes him to attempt to get back here. He's got a lot of politicking to do, both in Makerfield and in Westminster.
And it's worth saying, so he's twice ran for the Labour leadership before, in 2010 when he lost to Ed Miliband, in 2015 when he lost to Jeremy Corbyn.
And he actually started the 2015 one as the favourite.
Yes.
That competition.
Yes. I bumped into a very senior Conservative in Westminster this week who said to me, and obviously they would say this and obviously they would do this, but they said, we're going through the archives and digging out all of the clips. So he's also going to come in for a lot of opposition from the opposition. And the point they were making is that there might be quite a fair amount of MPs in Westminster of the 2024 intake of Labour MPs who don't know Andy Burnham. And so you can bet your bottom dollar that the Conservatives and others, as you might expect they would, are going to be trying to shape that opinion.
And he's not necessarily had the scrutiny while he's been the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Adam, that many other cabinet ministers have had over the last 2 years in government, or the 5 years under Keir Starmer's leadership in opposition. So I think the pressure and scrutiny he'll suddenly face, a bit like arguably the Green Zach Balansky's faced, Nigel Farage facing questions about his finances. That does happen when you're suddenly in the spotlight. It could be challenging. And he did start his career as a Blairite. I mean, he worked for Tessa Jowell. He served as a minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. His critics argue that his opinions change with the wind, but I think what he managed to prove in Greater Manchester, partly actually during the pandemic. Remember, he was quite prominent around lockdown restrictions.
Yeah, because when we were in the tiered zone where you have different places having different restrictions, Manchester he felt was being dealt with quite harshly.
Yeah, and he was
back quite hard.
He was seen as one of the sort of better communicators who stood up for his area, a bit like maybe Nicola Sturgeon took advantage from that period in Scotland too, and he has sort of built on his national profile. I suppose perhaps we don't quite know what his politics are now because he's not faced the scrutiny many of his rivals have in Westminster.
And he was on Newscast last year with his mate Steve Rotherham, the mayor of Liverpool, because they'd written a book about how the things that they were doing in the north of England could be an excellent blueprint for maybe doing across the whole of the UK. And two things jumped out at me from us listening back to that episode the other day there. He's in favour of proportional representation, so a different voting system. And also, when it comes to Westminster and voting at Westminster, he doesn't think MPs should be whipped to follow instructions from their party leaders to vote for legislation.
He might change his mind.
Yeah, exactly, because as Prime Minister, that
on
would make your life very hard if you didn't have the power to whip people. And Alex, just a little bit of backstory to this as well. The fact that it's this guy, Josh Simons, standing aside. He is, well, some people might say he's a bit player, but he has been a player in the drama of the last few months, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I'm not sure many people thought that it would be Josh Simons who was going to stand aside for Andy Burnham. And the reason for that is because Josh Simons was the former guy at the head of the top of Labour Together. Now, Labour Together was the think tank that was widely credited for propelling Keir Starmer into number 10 and doing all of the preparation work behind it. Fair enough, Josh Simons took over a little bit later than the heart of that operation, but that's the background. He was given a job he was a minister. He had to quit that job because of all the controversy over the actions of Labour Together, the think tank, when he had been there as part of it. So he's not the kind of person that people thought would suddenly lean in to seemingly support Andy Burnham by stepping aside and giving up his seat, even though he had come out a couple of days earlier and said that he did think it was time for Keir Starmer to go. So that's like another kind of little curveball in it. And that's prompted a whole lot of speculation, and it is speculation, I should really stress, about whether or not people in the broadest of broad terms on the right of the Labour Party are actually working with supporters of the left or the soft left who might lean towards Andy Burnham to try and kind of have some sort of, joint coronation and save some sort of strange battle. Now, it's worth saying that lots of folk are disputing that or denying that or whatever. But I think given that, we'll talk about Wes Streeting in a moment, but the nature of the way that Wes Streeting didn't leap over to challenge Keir Starmer directly and suggested there should be a contest with a broad field and as many candidates as possible, seems now that the party is coalescing around the notion, at least, that Andy Burnham's going to be on the pitch.
And Josh Simons is also just 32 years old. What's so odd about him resigning, he's only just arrived. He did arguably crash and burn quite quickly in becoming a minister and being forced to resign, but it does seem unexpected. And in by-elections, it's often somebody who wants to retire or somebody who's facing ill health who steps down to make space. Josh Simons is somebody who is seen as incredibly bright, promising sort of policy brain. His critics say not quite sort of street smart in politics, which is why he got himself into trouble. But odd that he decides to stand down. He argues for a principled reason so soon after arriving.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the journalistic inquiries around who might be willing to give up their seat in the northwest of England for Andy Burnham has tended to focus on folk not exactly in their first flush of youth, assuming that the carriage clock and a spot of retirement would appeal, and it turns out it's a 30-something.
And just to be clear, the first hurdle that Andy Burnham was going to face was actually being allowed to throw his hat in the ring to be selected as the Labour candidate in this by-election. And tonight we've been getting all the signals from the Labour leadership that they will not stand in his way. So just to confirm, that first hurdle looks like he's cleared it already. Right, let's rewind the clock back to the ancient time of 1 p.m. on Thursday.
We're going backwards, are we?
Yeah, we're going back. Yeah, that's the power of podcasting.
Not jumping
you can do whatever order you want to do it in. Wes Streeting finally announcing his resignation, which I sort of felt was about to happen for about the last 49 and a half hours, Chris.
Yeah, we were building up to, and in fact, when Alex and I were chatting on Politics Live on BBC Two at lunchtime just before 1 o'clock, we were saying, because I think it was reasonable to say at the time, although we would say that, wouldn't we, that the story then felt like Wes Streeting's not saying anything when there's been this anticipation that he would. And then when he did say something, he sort of said half of what he might have said. So he said he was resigning as Health Secretary. By the way, during the morning, I was being sent stuff that was being sent by him to Labour MPs, which were the kind of these like kind of game show style photo slide things being sent around on WhatsApp groups to Labour MPs, which is effectively him doing his, as he saw it, his greatest hits as Health Secretary. Then at lunchtime, he packs it in and walks, and it's a pretty stinging critique of the Prime Minister and his style of government in his resignation letter, but does not say that he's going to, throw his hat in the ring, nor say that he's got the support to allow him to do that, and then began a blizzard of briefing from those on his side saying, yes, he's got the numbers, but he's taking his time. He respects the fact the party wants a conversation. All the stuff about leaving space for Andy Burnham to make a move. By the way, Team Burnham say there wasn't any coordination with them around all of that. And then you had other folk who are broadly speaking on Team Starmer, who were saying, look, we don't think he's got the numbers. And in fact, somebody who I was talking to who was well placed to have a sense of how the numbers might shake out in the Parliamentary Labour Party claimed to me that there was only 44 nailed-on backers for Wes Streeting.
Which is only just over half of what he would have needed.
Indeed, and that for him to clear the total would require loads and loads and loads and loads of ministers to resign. Now, you might think, well, hang on a minute, if you've got supporters on the radio out loud saying he has got support, and then you've got other people off the record saying he hasn't, both can't be right. It's sort of possible they sort of could be, because support is not necessarily the same thing as being willing to sign on the dotted line now. So anyway, we'll see.
So what do we think is going to happen to Wes Streeting in the next few months? I mean, is he he hasn't ruled himself out of being in a contest that then gets triggered by Andy Burnham as we then get to hurdle number 19 in this theoretical future.
Well,
but like, is he sort of off the pitch now, Chris?
No, I don't think he's off the pitch. I mean, he is still. He would still have the. If he had the numbers, he could go over the top at any point of his choosing, and that would trigger. That would trigger the process. Now, given that the party has now said that it won't stand in the way of Andy Burnham running in a by-election, and we're collectively of the accepted view that this is not a typical by-election, that is the party saying that it anticipates the potential for a race with Andy Burnham on the ticket if he can win the by-election, which points to a timescale that isn't sort of wildly rushed. That said, just to walk through where we might get to timing-wise before I guess we dive into the sort of where Wes Streeting is, it's quite possible, I think, that the writ, that's the procedure that is invoked for a by-election date to be set, could come quite quickly. So Josh Simons...
Because it's in the hands of the chief whip of the party whose MP is standing down, isn't it?
Indeed. And so Josh Simons could request a Crown appointment, which would exclude him from being able to carry on as an MP. By the way, a couple of Scottish National Party MPs have done just that, having won seats at Holyrood, and you become the now let's get this right between us, the Manor of Northstead or the Chiltern Hundreds, which are Crown appointments which you cannot hold whilst also being an elected member of Parliament, and that means because technically you can't resign as an MP. Anyway,
basically, there's a weird MPs don't resign like anyone else resigns from a job. You get appointed to a weird historic pretend job. It sounds like it's from Game of Thrones.
Completely,
That's how you resign,
and you hold that post until somebody else resigns and takes the post from you. Anyway. That could all happen quite quickly. So, is it possible you get that by-election within about a month or 5 weeks, maybe? I'm speculating now. If you did do that, and Andy Burnham won, so two ifs, he could be back in Parliament by sort of mid-June, end of June. That's still 3 weeks, 4 weeks before Parliament rises for the summer. I'm just imagining, where we might be with some kind of timescale here. Are you then looking at a contest that is happening over the summer and concluding around about the time of the party conferences, maybe in the autumn? Is that the time frame we're now looking at? I don't know, but it may well be, given how the last couple of hours have panned out.
But that presumes, Chris, that Keir Starmer doesn't hold on. And what is so strange about today is that it's not clear anyone has the 81 names, and who knows what Andy Burnham would have, but everybody is talking about, in Parliament, including Labour MPs, talking about who is next. We have effectively a leadership contest, Adam, which has started without a vacancy and without anyone being declared. And so much of the focus now being on the future means that Keir Starmer is in this awkward position of being a little bit in the past and sort of forgotten but not gone.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Andy Burnham, in sort of politely nodding to that reality in his statement, and also, of course, hoping for the time to sort out the by-election, etc., was saying effectively, look, this last week's been a spot on the lively side. Let's give the government a chance to govern for a bit. Very tricky when you're paralysed by this sort of stuff. And as you say, Joe, where the Prime Minister's power is basically kind of gone. But let's give the government a bit of space to govern whilst this process works its way through.
Yeah, this is going to sound very countercultural because everyone's been very excited today and it seems very momentous. But I thought one of the themes of what everyone's been saying was just trying to step back from the precipice a little bit. So if you think about Wes Streeting's letter where, he didn't actually trigger the contest. And then he says, I want, when there is a discussion about the party's future and the next leader, for it to be really wide so that we can have lots of ideas, which is an opening to people like Andy Burnham. Then you got Keir Starmer's response to Wes Streeting's resignation letter, which was really nice, laid it on quite thick, did not have a sort of spurned X feel to it at all, really.
By letter.
And then you've got Andy Burnham saying, let's everyone just be respectful to the Prime Minister who's in post at the moment and still has got a job to do. So that's everyone just trying to dial it down from 11 to maybe sort of 9.
Yeah, completely. Because whilst that is what they're saying in the warm words publicly, the vitriol that is spinning around, particularly at Westminster, to be fair, there hasn't been a vast amount from those who are the closest to Andy Burnham. In fact, I've not picked up any from those closest to Andy Burnham. There's been a few noises here and there. The stuff that's been flying around at Westminster, particularly between kind of Team Starmer and Team Streeting, and particularly actually broadly speaking from those supportive of the Prime Minister in Team Streeting's direction, has been jaw-dropping.
There's a couple of things to note on that. I think you're right, Adam, to read the sentiment from some of those letters and statements about the need for people just to take a breath and step back. But I think there's something else, which is the growing awareness of how all of this is going to land with the public. And I think, you've heard that from Labour MPs who've been acutely conscious of that already up to this point and have expressed it quite openly. In the Prime Minister's letter, there was a line that stood out to me. This is his letter to Wes Streeting in response to his resignation, when he said a reminder of what he called the chaos of the Conservatives when they changed leader and how much damage, in his view, that did. And I suspect, and I don't know this now, but I suspect there will be a sort of slight period now of calmer kind of attitudes from within the Labour Party while that by-election process unfolds. The by-election itself will obviously be hugely contested and lots of attention on it. You wonder then after that, and I think you're starting to get a sense of this from quite senior people in the Labour Party already, how much there is a sort of growing call for some sort of, rather than a bruising open contest, some sort of agreed transfer. So Margaret Hodge, for example, who is a Labour peer, been around a long time, she was suggesting that there should be a sort of agreed timetable and a coronation, to use her word. Lucy Powell, who is the deputy leader of the Labour Party, we understand she's going to be talking at a Fire Brigade's union conference, saying something very similar, talking about the need for Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Andy Burnham to all work together. I just sort of wonder if that's going to become a growing voice in this conversation. And it won't be everybody, because obviously the Prime Minister at this stage has made clear that he's going nowhere and he thinks he was elected to govern. So I think there's a lot of question about how the Prime Minister now responds to what might be a section of the party increasingly calling for a kind of handover of power as opposed to a bruising battle.
The precedent for the Labour Party would be Blair handing over to Brown, and the reason there wasn't a contest was because Brown had managed to either eliminate all his opponents or convince them not to stand against him, so that actually Tony Blair could say, I'm going to leave on this date, Gordon Brown will take over that afternoon.
Yeah, and it's too early to say whether that's going to be the case now, because it depends what Wes Streeting decides to do. Andy Burnham's made his intention abundantly clear at this point. It depends what Wes Streeting decides to do. It then depends what the Prime Minister decides to do. And certainly the message from the Prime Minister is, we want to govern. obviously, what we have seen over the course of the last few days makes it harder to govern because he's had this vocal opposition from 89 of his own Labour MPs.
He's not done an
to his
interview for
leadership.
days, has he?
He hasn't done an interview for days. His cabinet have come out. So we've heard from Bridget Phillips in the Education Secretary on Thursday, Pat McFadden in the cabinet, giving their support to the Prime Minister, saying we want to get on with the job. But in reality, when you've had that public questioning of your authority and leadership from within your own party, the very act of governing becomes harder. And that's before we get to some potentially controversial legislation that was in the King's speech that was already looking likely to attract some opposition from within the Labour Party. Now, where does that leave him? So just the practical as well as the political aspect of governing has become harder.
I'm just picturing what it would be like to be in Makerfield in that election, and you could print off the list of legislation that was in the King's speech yesterday and say to Andy Burnham, "Do you agree to that?" You kind of almost imagine me standing there with a clipboard and a pen, going, "Do you agree to this bit of legislation? If you're Prime Minister, do you agree to this? Do you agree to this?"
Yeah, but it's also going to be there'll be all of that, but then there he might be sort of stood at a bus stop or in a cafe or in a leisure centre and asked about how he would deal with Donald Trump or what he makes of what's just happened in the Straits of Hormuz, and that will be a relevant question given the pitch of his by-election to be Prime Minister.
It could be pretty chaotic, couldn't it? Especially as Keir Starmer had promised to end the chaos and had that line in his speech on day one on the steps of Downing Street that he would tread more lightly on people's lives. This week hasn't necessarily given that message to voters.
Also, I was just thinking this morning when a leadership contest imminently was looking a little bit more likely, presumably Keir Starmer, who would get a free pass into that contest, he wouldn't have to get any nominations, so he'd be guaranteed to be in it, wouldn't be allowed to use any kind of prime ministerial resources to fight it because it would be a Labour Party thing. And then
Good
you're
point,
like, well, would Keir Starmer have to pay the government for his car rides to the leisure centre where he was going to do his hustings? Would he be having to phone up donors to get people to fund his campaign? And it would be so weird to have a Prime Minister who's a Prime Minister,
on the party,
Prime
not his
Minister
special
9 till
advisors.
5, but outside that, just sort of on the stump.
I mean, that's sort of what's happened with the local elections. Certainly, civil servants told special advisors, only one of you, for example, I think in one instance, can go to this event just to sort of look after him from a prime ministerial point of view. But we can't have
you can't go on a nuclear submarine and do your slogans.
Absolutely, but you can't have people who are being paid for by the public helping out with a Labour campaign event. Absolutely not.
The reason I dwell on that is it's a very nerdy point.
It's a very Fleming point.
But how odd it would all feel.
But also, what happens to
that's
ministers in the government? Are they allowed to support other candidates in any Labour
Brexit,
leadership
isn't it, all over
contest?
again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
never been a sitting Labour Prime Minister that's actively fought a leadership contest, so it's kind of unprecedented.
Right, let's rewind to the ancient history of 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, where we got another bombshell in a day of bombshells. Angela Rayner cleared by the tax authorities for her underpayment of stamp duty when she was buying her property on the south coast. So she is back. She's got a tick from the taxman.
Yeah,
or
and
woman, or person.
as of 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, which does feel like 17 years ago at this point, but as of that point, that was really crucial because not only because that means that Angela Rayner can be back, and it's interesting to note that Keir Starmer's among those that have said before he'd like to have her back in his cabinet. Actually, he's made no secret about that. Wes Streeting has said that Angela Rayner should be on the pitch in the past. So not only that in that sense, but as of 6 a.m. this morning, before we had all these developments about Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham and all the rest of it, obviously the context was that might potentially clear the way for Angela Rayner to run in any leadership race if she chose to, if Wes Streeting had, for example, triggered a contest before Andy Burnham could get back to Parliament. Now, we don't find ourselves in that eventuality, and she made clear when she gave a series of interviews to The Guardian and ITV that she wasn't going to be the person to kind of pull the trigger against Keir Starmer. But
The
also...
the timing of it, the idea, as we've had confirmed to us, that she got this letter or confirmation from HMRC on Tuesday. Wednesday, of course, no one could do anything with the King's speech.
And of course,
going
Tuesday was the day that we had this trickle of MPs and a few ministers saying we don't like the Prime Minister
fed
anymore.
up. I mean, just how perfectly has it worked out for her? Wednesday, okay, it's the King's speech. No one would dare say anything. But clearly they were pre-recording a TV interview and chatting to Pippa Crerar on the phone, ready to drop it at 6 a.m. Now, of course, by 6 p.m, two other potential rivals were dominating the headlines. But it has cleared the way for Angela Rayner. She hasn't she's not going to challenge Keir Starmer directly, she said, but she's also, I think, tried, a bit like Wes Streeting, to look like she's thinking about a broad contest. She wouldn't necessarily rule out backing somebody else. It's not all about me, she's basically arguing. Maybe there is another strong contender, but I suppose those are the sort of messages from Rayner and Streeting that at this stage is probably necessary if you're trying to persuade Labour members.
And Angela Rayner is going to be a key voice in that contest, regardless of what happens, because she commands a lot of support from a certain section of the party.
And here's a thought, which may be overtaken by the time this is watched or listened to by newscasters.
Oh, probably.
That there's a vacancy in the cabinet, and Keir Starmer has said he wants to bring Angela Rayner back to the cabinet. But would she want to come back to the cabinet right now? Does she fancy being health secretary? I just sort of throw that into the mix in terms of the dilemmas that so many of the kind of players in this drama wrestle with and have been doing this week, seemingly sort of minute by minute. You know, what if you're Keir Starmer? Is that a wise thing to do? Outwardly, I think probably it would be. If you're Angela Rayner, is it a wise thing to accept? I think that's a trickier thing to wrestle with. Anyway, as you're listening or watching, we may already have the answer, but there you go.
And also, we learnt in the New Statesman magazine this week, in the diary column, which was written by Sam Tarry, the former Labour MP who's Angela Rayner's partner, that she was doing one of these assault course races for charity last weekend. And he said, "Oh, do you want me to cook you a healthy breakfast?" And she said, "Oh, I've already had breakfast." And she'd had a bowl of sweets and a cigarette. And I just wonder, does that send a great message as your new health secretary? That's what they have before they go and do their...
Well, she wasn't going to go and do a charity
like that,
run.
don't they?
I mean,
I think a lot of people like that. There's a sort of authenticity, I suppose, to her. Certainly, some close to Rayner have said that she wouldn't want to do a big job temporarily. She wouldn't want to be a caretaker. I suppose the other part of this, and I've heard this from some MPs this evening, is they think, what on earth is happening with number 10? If Wes Streeting jumped at 1 p.m. and we're now looking at, 10 to 8, that's almost 7 hours of having no health secretary. Is that because number 10 are struggling to find the appropriate person, or they just want to wait till the sort of news calms down? I'm not sure, but it is odd that a major department is without a boss for quite a long time.
And in the recent vacancies that they've had to fill, when we saw the resignation of those ministerial aides, and then we saw those resignation of ministers below the cabinet level, they were filled relatively quickly. So I mean, I would have thought it'll happen soonish, and it'd be fascinating.
Who's your money on, Chris?
I don't know. To be honest, we've all been talking about how this is a sort of 57-hour day or whatever. I'm giving up.
I could say the name of a fake MP that I've just invented, and you'd probably all go, yeah, good bet, just to get out of the studio and go and have a break and have something to eat. But that's the perfect time for us to wrap up this episode of Newscast towards the end of a very, very, very busy week for British politics. So, Joe, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Alex, good to see you again.
pleasure as ever.
And Chris, good to catch up.
Cheers.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye-bye.